Hello, my name is GiBi, this is Toto, and welcome to the Spooky Shack. It's been a little while, and so I want to spend this video talking about a couple things. We're going to get to comments in a second, but I have a topic that's been floating around in my mind for a little while, and I think this type of video is the exact type of video to just, spitball for a second. See, I've been talking about, with other theorists, I've been talking about the things in the FNAF franchise that are intended to be solved when a game comes out. For example, when you play through Secret of the Mimic, you're supposed to put together that Fiona is in the computer. I mean, it kind of directly tells you that, but you're supposed to figure out M1 and M2 being David, and also the White Tiger. The White Tiger is David, although we're never really explicitly told this in the games. If the book didn't exist, if the books that tell you that David's the White Tiger didn't exist, you could play it and be like, oh wait, look, there's a painting of David with the tiger, so I bet the tiger in the basement is David, right? That's the kind of mystery that's intended to be solved within the game that it's first shown in. And then there's other kinds of mysteries. And those are the mysteries that are only meant to be solved later when more information comes to light. That's actually the type of mystery that I talked about in my recent video about David being the one you should not have killed. Those mysteries are unfortunate because we'll get to the end of the game and we don't know which is which. We don't know if it's the kind of mystery where you can solve it right now if you just look close enough, or if it's the kind of mystery that we're just kind of waiting on more information to solve. But there is a third type of mystery. And the third type of mystery is the thing that's literally never going to be solved. I think I'm going to title this video something to the effect of we were never meant to solve the Bite of 87. And that's true. There's not really evidence in FNAF 2 itself to tell us who the culprit was in the Bite of 87. We can assume it was one of the toy animatronics because they get decommissioned right at the end of the game, but you can always argue that, hey, they're decommissioned because they were supposed to keep out predators, and yet they let someone in who was able to kill people for the DCI or whatever. So I think it's a toy, I think that's what the game's trying to say, but there is an argument against it. And then even if it is a toy, which toy was it? Was it Mangle because of the jaws? Was it Toy Chica because in UCN she says my beak's in your forehead? There's a lot of options, there's a lot of evidence for basically all of the culprits, except for the puppet, because I don't think the puppet can bite down, with a mouth. I do not think that the culprit of the Bite of 87 will ever be addressed. I think that Scott in future titles might look back at old lore like Midnight Motorist or the year that FNAF 3 takes place and might explain in future games. It's been 10 years, he can tell us those answers now, but I don't think he's ever going to tell us who did the Bite of 87 because it doesn't matter. It really does not matter. It's something for us to just talk about until the end of time. I don't know if Scott even picked an animatronic to be the one to do it, to be the culprit. He's just yeah, it was a Bite of 87. Someone got bit. It doesn't matter. And so I don't think it's ever going to be answered. So those are the three types of mysteries. The mystery that's solved in the game it's brought up, the mystery that will be elaborated on in a future entry, and the mystery that's not a mystery, it's just a hole in the story that's not going to be filled that we can look at and go, oh, that's a cool hole. I have a cool hill allegory, and I have a cool hole allegory. And the Bite of 87 is a cool hole. Moving on from that in a very natural segue, my video about David TOYSNHK got a lot of comments, and I'm going to be looking at some of those comments right now. For a refresher, the video was about how the one you should not have killed, the person torturing William in UCN, is actually David Murray, who we didn't know about until Secret of the Mimic. My argument is that when Scott was making UCN, he conceptualized the idea of William's first victim, someone furthest back in the timeline that we'd never met, and his idea was to continue the story of this person, to flesh out their backstory, to learn their motivation and more about them in the future games, in Help Wanted, in Security Breach, and now in Secret of the Mimic. Help Wanted only came out a year after UCN, and so I really think that the idea of an earliest victim is something that Scott could have loosely been aware of around the time of UCN, for him to then plot forward when making the new games. I really do think that when Scott was making Help Wanted and invented the character of Glitch Trap, he knew where the story was going. He knew about F10N4, he knew about the Mimic. Those were things that are necessary to understand, necessary to conceptualize at the same time as inventing the Glitch Trap. Those are all the same entity. They're all the same character. So I do think that Scott did plan his 4 games of story all the way back then. And a lot of people are like, how could Scott have thought of this back in the day? There is so little story in each FNAF game that literally, like, it would take 2 paragraphs on a sheet of paper to summarize Security Breach and Secret of the Mimic and Help Wanted. He could just be like, okay, so, like, there's a virus in the VR game that then becomes real, and then in the next game we learn that there is something behind the scenes of the Pizzaplex is like building a robot body, and then in the next one we learn it's the Mimic, and then we flash back and we learn the origin of the Mimic, and he also worked this out through the Tales from the Pizzaplex books. I do not think it's difficult to conceptualize that David Murray existed when the Security Logbook and when UCM came out, just because it was so many years ago. It was only a couple games ago, and the games are so story light, I really don't think that's an issue whatsoever. So the idea is that David is TOYSNHK. Not Crying Child, not Cassidy doesn't exist, and not Andrew, whose super doesn't exist because the books aren't canon. Who is Andrew? Fazbear Fright. Yeah, when you're making this kind of video, it's always hard to, like, know what the average viewer knows going in. It's very difficult, especially for something complicated like David TOYSNHK, where you're not only arguing for your conclusion based on the evidence, you're also arguing against fandom consensus. I tackled 2 big issues in that video. The first is that Cassidy doesn't exist and that David is TOYSNHK, and the second is that Charlie was a member of the MCI. Because Cassidy doesn't exist, Charlie is clumped in. Charlie is grouped in with the other 4. Those are 2 things that the fandom does not currently believe and are big asks. But if you go in and you don't know those 2 things, I'm just yapping about nothing. I'm like, just so you know, Cassidy doesn't exist. Who's Cassidy? So it's like, okay, do I explain who Cassidy is? Do I explain why people think that they exist? Like, how much stuff needs to go into the video for people to explain versus things that I can just assume people know? It's always really difficult. And this person obviously didn't know who Andrew was. Another issue people kept having was another thing that I glossed over in the video because it's something I assumed everyone knew, but apparently not, because a couple people had issue with the gender of the one you should not have killed. If you play UCN, it is very clear that the one you should not have killed is male. The characters continue to refer to him with male pronouns.
He's here and always watching, the one you shouldn't have killed.
For a while, people were arguing, myself included, that Cassidy was still capable of being the one you should not have killed even if she was a girl, because he referred to Golden Freddy. If Cassidy is a girl, and if she haunts Golden Freddy, people might refer to her as a he. Cassidy could also be a boy, because Cassidy's a gender-neutral name. We'll get to that one in a second, but a lot of people were leaving comments on the video talking about TOYSNHK, who seemingly didn't know that it is confirmed that TOYSNHK is male. I think Fiona is the Vengeful Spirit. She was the first, and I think a kid is less likely to be vengeful, but a mother watching a bunch of kids killed, ... We don't even know if it's a girl or a boy, as well as the fact that Scott clearly wouldn't have thought this far ahead. And then there was actually quite a few people who thought that TOYSNHK would be Fiona. Again, we know that TOYSNHK is male, so TOYSNHK cannot be Fiona. And now we get to another issue. This isn't about FNAF lore, this is about, like, reality. Cassidy is a gender-neutral name. Cassidy can be a boy name or a girl name. This is a fact. You can look this up. This is not something I'm asserting that requires evidence in a video. It's just true. When was Cassidy gender neutral? Are you effing kidding me? It's in the name for F's sake. This is in reference to me saying we don't know if Cassidy's a boy or a girl. And also, we don't actually know Cassidy's gender. I'm assuming this person is saying that it's obvious that she's a girl because Cassidy's a girl's name. And no, it's not. It's both. I do think hands down the weirdest FNAF theory is just Cassidy is a boy. People who think Cassidy is the name of the crying child, I understand. Or if they think Cassidy is Andrew or something, that makes sense. But the contingent of people who just maintain that Cassidy is a boy, not a specific boy, just a boy. Cassidy has to be a boy. Cassidy could never be a girl. It's a boy. Like, why is this important to you? It's important to people because we know that TOYSNHK is male. So if you want Cassidy to be TOYSNHK, Cassidy has to be a boy. Which she might be, because Cassidy can be a boy's name. Based on a lot of other Cassidy gender comments I was getting, it seems like Cassidy being a girl's only name is more common in the UK than it is in America. Like, I know boy whose name is Cassidy. But again, this is not a problem with a FNAF video. It's just a fact that Cassidy is a gender-neutral name. This is going to sound like a lot of complaining early on in the video, but there's also comments people left, both positive and negative, that really seems like they left the comment but didn't watch the video. And if you're a YouTuber, you're totally gonna get this, because this kind of stuff happens all the time. Another piece of evidence for David being the Vengeful Spirit is the gravestone ending. We have two covered graves, the one in grass possibly being Charlie, and the other under the tree on the hill being David. You know, David is kinda always under trees on hills. Yeah, I know, I said that in the video. As far as we're aware, David Murray wasn't killed by Afton, and Crying Child isn't part of the MCI, so if he's Cassidy, we're missing an MCI kid. The missing MCI kid is Charlie. I say this in the video. I don't really see how Charlotte can be an MCI victim if she's killed outside in an alleyway and William sped away from the scene of the crime, which is still established as late as FFPS. Why would she be considered missing? I explained that in the video you left this comment under. Me and a lot of other FNAF theorist YouTubers will often complain about the general lack of knowledge among the FNAF fan base. If you watch a lot of FNAF videos, and you understand what the terminology we use means, and you understand which games are canon. I use that specifically as an example because Withered Circle was just talking about someone who left a "nuh-uh" post on one of his theories because they thought that one of the FNAF analog horror VHS tapes was real. No. When we complain about the fandom, we're talking about the people who genuinely don't know things. We're not talking about you. If I'm on a live stream with Withered Circle and we're complaining about how, like, uninformed on the franchise FNAF fans are, and you're like, I'm not uninformed on the FNAF franchise, we're not talking about you. We get tens of thousands of comments on our videos of people saying nonsense. And that's why it's just frustrating as a YouTuber. You have to scroll through that kind of stuff before you can actually get to constructive criticism, counterpoints, and, you know, nice comments. This isn't really about being a FNAF theorist, it's just about being a YouTuber in general. Even in my non-FNAF YouTube videos, there's always comments where people are just asking questions that are answered in the videos, and it's like, I swear, what, what are you doing? So if we ever seem frustrated, or we ever generalize things to the general FNAF community, we're talking about a very specific group of people who are probably 10 years old, who leave comments on videos saying nonsense. Here's a bunch of comments that aren't nonsense. So in my video, I say that there's no conflicting evidence for David TOYSNHK, there's just a bunch of holes that would actually lead you to get to that conclusion. And this person says, there is no conflicting evidence, the humble gives gifts, give life minigame. This is a good point. In the give gifts, give life minigame, the puppet goes around and puts mask on the four dead kids to have them haunt the animatronics, and then a Golden Freddy mask flies to the screen and we see a fifth kid there for a second. Does this contradict the idea that Golden Freddy is only possessed by Crying Child and David Murray? You could argue that it's saying that Golden Freddy is possessed after those four, and if that is the case, it would be difficult to say that it's David or Crying Child. I just don't necessarily think that that's required in the reading of this very abstract minigame. I think that the events we see between nights in FNAF 2, the dreams or the nightmares, are a more realistic depiction of what's actually happening in Give Gifts, Give Life. So we're already looking at something incredibly abstract in the same game. These are both happening in FNAF 2. And so the Golden Freddy mask and the kid appearing last, I don't think necessitates Golden Freddy kid dying last. You could also argue something like, oh, if it is Crying Child, he was in his coma in his bed, maybe he was there until after, the pole wasn't plugged until after the MCI. Or in my interpretation of how David probably got into Golden Freddy, it would be that, you know, the Agni, the remnant from the parts that are haunted from the Murray's Costume Manor, maybe those weren't added to the Golden Freddy suit until after the MCI happened. So yes, this is a good point, this is a good thing you noticed. I just don't think that it's like a slam dunk, oh, this disproves everything. There are plenty of ways around it, especially whenever it comes to the 8-bit minigames, which are just so interpollistic. How would you explain the Bear of Vengeance cutscenes from UCN under this theory? In my mind, they imply pretty strongly that Bite Victim is the Vengeful Spirit. So the problem with this line of argument is always that people will take the name Bear of Vengeance, one of the TV show cutscenes in UCN that alternate with the TOYSNHK high school years, and say this is supposed to tell us something about the Vengeful Spirit. Problem is, the Vengeful Spirit is not the name of the entity. In the game, his name is the one you should not have killed. Vengeful Spirit is a name that the fandom gave to this character. It's based on the name that Scott gave for the casting call of the one you should not have killed. In the universe of FNAF, Vengeful Spirit is not a term that's actually used, so you cannot tie TOYSNHK to Bear of Vengeance because they both use the word vengeance, because they don't actually use the word vengeance. The TOYSNHK does not use the word vengeance. His name is not the Vengeful Spirit. Fandom name. So immediately that makes these two things significantly less linked than some people might think. There's still the argument that the bear from Bear of Vengeance might be TOYSNHK in that he is trying to get vengeance on someone. Although I think the clear interpretation of Bear of Vengeance is that it's crying child arguing, fighting, trying to get vengeance against Mike. And that doesn't map on with TOYSNHK and the player of UCN, because the player of UCN is certainly William. And Bite Victim cannot be TOYSNHK because Bite Victim was not killed by William. I really think these are two different sets of characters, two different ideas, and the word vengeful does not link them because TOYSNHK is not actually called the Vengeful Spirit. One of the things I talked about was the Cassidy screenplay. Before the FNAF movie got made, Scott made a post on Reddit talking about screenplays that he decided not to go with. One of them is the Cassidy screenplay. He said it followed the character Cassidy over many years and it touched on different points of the franchise, but it didn't make a compelling narrative. It was more like walking through an encyclopedia of FNAF iconography rather than a story. A lot of people took this to mean that it was about Golden Freddy, which I'd agree, and that it confirmed that this Cassidy fandom character, this person, this PNG, which I have to keep reminding people, this is a fan-made thing, this is not from the games, that this character, the Cassidy Vengeful Spirit, would have been the main character in the movie. And I argued that if Cassidy is the name of the crying child, and if the crying child haunts Golden Freddy, Scott's description of this movie would fit perfectly with a movie about the crying child. So this person says, don't we already have a crying child stand-in in the movies? Garrett. A Cassidy screenplay referring to a movie's version parallel of Crying Child doesn't make sense if Garrett is already that. This is a little hard to parse, but I think what they're saying is, if Scott rejected a Cassidy screenplay, why would he greenlight the screenplay that we have if it also is about a crying child stand-in? And I just don't think that that's what the issue is here. I think Scott named that the Cassidy screenplay because Cassidy, the crying child, would have been the main character. Scott called the movie that we did get the Mike screenplay, because Mike is the protagonist. So a movie retelling the events of FNAF from the perspective of Crying Child, I think would be very ethereal. It would be weird. You'd be watching the movie from the perspective of a ghost or from the perspective of Golden Freddy, as opposed to from the perspective of a guy who's the security guard. Having it from the perspective of a guy who's the security guard seems to make the most sense, which is why Scott went with it. The movie we did get, the Mike screenplay, having a crying child stand-in does not mean that was the issue with the original screenplay. So I don't think that having a crying child, Garrett, in the real movie says anything about Scott's reasoning for not wanting to make the Cassidy script. One of the things I addressed in my video, and that a lot of other theorists believe, is that Cassie's father is the Bonnie bully from FNAF 4. I like all of this, except Cassie's dad would have to have been in his 50s when he had her, if he was the one in the Bonnie mask. It works, but realistically not very likely. So I think the misconception here is the year that Security Breach takes place. If we assume that the bullies are like 13, 14 when they bully Crying Child, I think for, because it takes place in 1983, for Mike to be a FNAF 2 guard, let's assume he has to be 18. He would have to be 14 in 1983 to be 18 by 1987. So we can say that him and his buddies are 13, 14 years old if they're in the same grade. So let's say that Bonnie Bully was born in 1970. Security Breach takes place in 2025. I will link Nara Raven's video in the description explaining how. If Cassie and Gregory are 12 years old, that means that she would have been born in 2013, which would make her father 90, 2000, 43 when he had her. Is that still late in life to be having kids? I mean, maybe. But it's not his 50s. Cassie could also be older, the Bonnie Bully could also be younger, or it's just like it doesn't matter, you don't need to explain why someone had a kid in their 40s. I just think there's a lot of people who still think that Security Breach takes place in the 2030s, which, no. One of the things people take issue with Charlie being one of the MCI victims is the quote from Henry in FNAF 6. He lured them all back to a familiar place, back with familiar tricks, he brought them all together. This line from Henry proves that the 5 children in the Follow Me minigame were killed in the safe room. So no, it actually doesn't, because in the Follow Me minigame, we only see William dismantle 4 of the animatronics. It doesn't matter who you cast as the 5th spirit in that minigame. Whether it's Charlie, Bite Victim, the fans' version of Cassidy, David Murray, it doesn't matter who that person is, William did not lure them to the back room. When Henry says all, he is still only talking about the 4 that were actually shown in Follow Me. We never see William dismantle Golden Freddy. This is simply disproven by what we actually see in Follow Me. This line only refers to the 4 main core animatronics that we see in Follow Me. So this has nothing about David TOYSNHK. One of the problems with making the type of video that my David TOYSNHK video is that it's relying on information assumed to be in future games to come to a conclusion. I open the video saying that I'm solving what Scott has yet to reveal. I think the evidence we have strongly indicates David TOYSNHK, but we're missing the smoking gun. We're missing what's going to be revealed in the next game. Mainly, that William killed David. So I'm shooting my shot to say that William will kill David, and then the rest of the theory will fall into place. So I get the people who are saying, but we don't know that William killed David. I know. It's the type of video predicting the future based on the evidence we have, not the type of video solving the mystery contained within the game. Like the 3 things I talked about at the beginning of the video. Another hole we currently have would be, why does David haunt Golden Freddy? I made a list of 3 points that I think would be tough pills to swallow, and this guy says, you forgot number 4, David having literally any connection to Fredbear Golden Freddy. So yes, that is something that I didn't mention, but it's because it's something that will be revealed in a later game. A lot of theorists already think that the talking Fredbear plush in FNAF 4 is the Mimic. I really don't think it takes a lot of creative thinking to imagine how David would get into Golden Freddy, whether through Mimic-isms or Vengeful Spirit-isms. The idea that the ghostly tiger entity in the basement of Murray's Costume Manor is also related to the golden costume entity of Golden Freddy throughout the rest of the series, I don't think is a leap. Whether it's because the entirety of Murray's Costume Manor is agonized by the orange goo flowing through it, by all the people who died there, including David, or it's literally that he changes his form to match the rest of the band as the series continues, which is already what people think about Golden Freddy. It's very easy to imagine how David's spirit got into Golden Freddy. It's something that will be revealed in the next game. In Secret of the Mimic, there's a depiction of a family, and we see people who are clearly stand-ins for the Aftons. Later in the Nurse Dolly section, you can see the person who's clearly a stand-in for Crying Child in a hospital bed. There's a golden balloon dog, supposed to be the Fredbear plushie, next to him, and the father character also next to him. This is depicting Crying Child's death, likely in the hospital after his head got bit with the Freddy plush there and with William there watching over him. How was this scene depicted in Secret of the Mimic 5 years before it happened? We don't know, but it is. It's in the game. If I put this forth and I said that that's what this is depicting, and someone said, how could it be depicting that? That hasn't happened yet. My response is, we don't know how it's depicting that yet, but it is. Likewise, my response to, what does David have to do with Golden Freddy is, we don't know, but it is. We will learn it later. And this is identical to the question of William killing David. A big issue I have with this is the fact that you said the Crying Child can't be the Vengeful Spirit because Afton didn't kill him, but you didn't provide evidence that he killed David either. We don't know how David died. I think it'll be revealed later that William killed him. There were a lot of people leaving comments saying David was hit by a car. David was hit by a car in another continuity in which Fiona died in childbirth and they lived in a worn-down fabric factory. Like, we cannot copy that from the books to the game's continuity. We have no idea how David died in the games. I love this theory, and there's one extra detail that adds to what you missed. In Ultimate Custom Night, TOYSNHK is linked to the Mediocre Melodies and talks through them. The Mediocre Melodies were made by his parents, and Pigpatch has heterochromia. Yeah, Pigpatch's heterochromia has always been weird because there are so few characters that have it. So why is it only White Tiger and Pigpatch? But yes, I did not think of this. This is true. In UCN, TOYSNHK's voice that you can hear underneath the voice of the other characters is only on the Mediocre Melodies, which are based on characters that were stolen from Edwin and Fiona. Great noticing. The idea that Scott was like, I'm going to introduce these new characters and flesh out their backstory in a future game, the Mediocre Melodies, is identical to, I'm going to introduce this character, TOYSNHK, and flesh out his backstory in a future game, David. So anyone who's like, Scott would never have left a dangling plot thread on who TOYSNHK is to only be revealed 7 years later in The Secret of the Mimic, yes he would. That's what he did with the Mediocre Melodies. One of the other claims I made is that Old Man Consequences is an imprint of Edwin. It's his spirit existing in FNAF world, it's a little bit of him inside the F10 computer, it doesn't really matter exactly how, just that Old Man Consequences is a stand-in for Edwin Murray. And that the Red Bear, the TOYSNHK, is David. So at the end of UCN, when the Red Bear walks up to OMC, it's David talking to his father. A bit of symbolism I notice. Old Man is sometimes used as a term of endearment for a father. Perhaps the name Old Man Consequences is symbolic of Murray, as perhaps the father of TOYSNHK. Genius! One of the other things I said is that Chica is a stand-in for Fiona, the way that Freddy is for Henry and Bonnie is for William, that Chica is a stand-in for Fiona. Jacko Chica in UCN says, "Greetings from the fire and from the one you should not have killed." The Fallfest fire? If Chica also represents Fiona, then that gains meaning. So yes, this is a further linkage of Fiona with Chica that I missed. Great job. Also, the grave up on the hill is also around golden yellow grass, as there's that as well. I did not believe this when I read it. I thought surely I would have noticed that before, and yet here we go. The grass at the bottom of the hill is clearly green, at the top of the hill it's clearly yellow. I know it's the sunlight, but like, it is. The main argument is that people think that the grave that's covered by the grass blade is Golden Freddy, and the one at the top of the hill would be the puppet. But the one at the top of the hill is bathed in golden light, so... Top of the hill, Golden Freddy confirmed, because the grass is yellow. Genuinely, I didn't notice this. Phenomenal. 99% noticer right there. And that's all the questions for now. I feel like I got a little defensive for some of those. Kind of just puts you in a bad mood, right? Like, especially when a YouTuber's answering, like in a comment section. You're primed to be in a bad mood, because so many people just didn't watch the video, or they think the VHS tapes are canon. So let's spread a bit of that Freddy's positivity. If you have a question that you want answered next time, please leave it below this video in the comments. Now, usually in these videos, I shout out another FNAF video that I really enjoyed. I haven't done this in so long that there's like a million FNAF videos that I've enjoyed recently. So instead of shouting out stuff that's like months old that I missed, I'm going to shout out 2 relatively recent videos that I think are phenomenal. The Untold Story of Vanny, FNAF Theory by She's Always Nervous, and The Existential Terror of FNAF Ransomware by Fredden's second channel, Fredden After Dark. So I will have those 2 videos linked in the description. And that is it for now. Please be sure to be nice to each other in the comments, consider supporting creators you admire, like going to my Patreon. I'm going to be starting those book videos up again soon, so if you want to be listed at the end of the book videos, you got to sign up to my Patreon. Merch store, Fredbear, Scare Bear shirt, Toto hat, and don't lose sight of the things that are important to you. Don't let the comments get to ya. Remember that Freddy stands for friendly, respectful engagement, discussion, and discourse yield success. And I'll see you next time. Maybe click on one of these videos over here. YouTube thinks you'll really like this one, and YouTube thinks that... I hate mirrors. Hold on. There. Yeah, I don't know. Watch that one too.